Cesar Millan, known as the Dog Whisperer, had long been the face of dog training, admired by millions around the world for his ability to tame even the most unruly pets. His calm demeanor and deep understanding of canine behavior earned him the title of a master, the one people turned to when they couldn't control their dogs. He seemed to have it all: success, fame, a seemingly perfect family life. But behind the scenes, things were very different. The public adored him, but the cracks in his personal life had been widening for years, unnoticed by many. His marriage to Ilusion Millan, the woman who had stood by him from the very beginning, had become a quiet battlefield. For years, Ilusion had lived in the shadows, supporting her husband's rise to fame while quietly enduring her own emotional turmoil. The long hours he spent away filming his TV show, the constant travel, the ever-growing demands of his celebrity status, these things took a toll. Yet she remained silent, her pain hidden beneath a veil of stoic composure. She tried to carry on, to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the supportive partner. But deep down, something was breaking. She felt invisible, a shadow of the woman she once was. The more Cesar's career soared, the more Ilusion felt like she was fading into the background, forgotten in the narrative that the world saw. The tension continued to build until one day, it became too much to bear. But even then, Ilusion said nothing. The rumors of their marriage falling apart had been circulating for months, but neither of them addressed it. To the world, Cesar and Ilusion appeared like a perfect couple, but in the quiet of their home, there was a different story, one of emotional exhaustion, neglect, and the growing realization that their relationship could no longer survive the strain. And then when it finally reached its breaking point, they parted ways. It wasn't just a divorce, it was a loss, a deep painful separation that left scars on both of them. For Ilusion, the silence that followed was deafening. She stayed out of the public eye, letting the world speculate about what went wrong, but she never spoke a word. She watched as her ex-husband continued to live his life, rise to even greater heights, and move forward with his career. Meanwhile, she carried the weight of their past in silence, knowing that the full truth of their marriage had never been told. The rumors kept swirling, but Ilusion remained silent. People wanted answers, but she didn't offer any. It was as if the pain of that chapter in her life was too much to relive, too much to share with a world that had already built its own version of events. What had truly gone wrong? Was it the fame, the pressure, the isolation, or was it something deeper, something that couldn't be fixed by even the most skilled dog trainer? The questions remained unanswered, and the mystery of what had happened to Cesar Millan's marriage lingered in the air. But now, after years of silence, Ilusion was ready to speak. She had waited long enough, and the truth had been buried for too long. The world was about to hear her side of the story, and it would be nothing like what anyone had expected. The truth was about to shake the foundations of what people thought they knew about the Millan family. The story that Ilusion had kept hidden for so long was finally coming to light, and it was going to change everything. The public had seen Cesar as the calm, collected expert on dog behavior, but they had never seen him through the eyes of his wife. They had no idea what it was like to live with a man who was constantly in the spotlight, who had to balance the demands of fame with the needs of his family. And now, as Ilusion prepared to speak out, the world would finally understand the full picture. What was the real reason behind their divorce? What had caused the breakdown in their relationship? And what had it been like for Ilusion, the woman behind the man who had silently suffered in the shadows of his success? The answers were about to be revealed, and no one was ready for the truth that was about to unfold. It was a story of pain, betrayal, and the price of fame, one that would leave everyone questioning what they thought they knew about the Millan family. For years, the Millan family was the epitome of the American dream. Cesar, a self-made man, became a household name, and Ilusion stood by his side, the perfect partner to a successful celebrity. The couple had what seemed like a flawless marriage, at least from the outside. However, as the world marveled at Cesar's talents and rising fame, a darker reality played out behind the scenes. Ilusion had always been the one who quietly supported her husband's dreams. She was there at the beginning, when they built their life together from scratch, long before the cameras began to roll. But as Cesar's career took off, the dynamics of their marriage began to change in subtle yet undeniable ways. Cesar's celebrity status, which once brought them together, soon became a wedge that slowly tore them apart. The demands of his career began to consume him. The long hours on set, the travel, the endless public appearances, these all left Ilusion feeling like a second priority in a relationship that had once been built on mutual support and understanding. The marriage began to feel like a balancing act, with Ilusion constantly trying to hold everything together, but her efforts were never enough. She started to feel like she was losing herself. Cesar's rise to fame meant that more and more people relied on him, but Ilusion was left behind, dealing with the loneliness that came with being married to a man whose world was expanding far beyond their home. As the years passed, the emotional connection between them began to fray. Ilusion's support, once given freely, was now met with frustration. She needed Cesar to be present, not just physically, but emotionally. But the man she married seemed to slip further away as his career became his priority. In the quiet moments, when the cameras were off and the work was done, Ilusion found herself questioning if her marriage was the same. Was it the same love they once shared? Was Cesar still the man she fell in love with, or had he become someone she no longer recognized? She tried to address her concerns, but with each attempt, it felt like she was speaking to a stranger. Cesar, for all his success in training dogs, seemed unable to fix the cracks in his own marriage. And while his fans saw him as a calm, controlled individual, those closest to him, including Ilusion, saw a different side. The pressures of fame and the relentless demand for his time left him emotionally distant. He was a man who could calm a nervous dog with a few words but couldn't seem to do the same for his wife. The emotional neglect was palpable, and with time, Ilusion began to realize that the relationship they once had was slipping through her fingers. But the hardest part wasn't just the growing distance between them, it was the feeling of being invisible. Ilusion had once been an equal partner in the relationship, but now it felt like she was just another person in the background of Cesar's life. His fame had overshadowed her, and she felt like she was living in the shadow of his success. The world saw him as a master of his craft, but Ilusion was no longer the woman who had been by his side through thick and thin. She was a ghost in her own life. The marriage, once built on love and respect, had turned into a one-sided relationship, and as the years wore on, Ilusion could no longer ignore the signs that the marriage was nearing its end. She had always been the supportive partner, but she couldn't carry the weight of their relationship on her own any longer. The silence between them grew, and the emotional distance became a chasm that was impossible to bridge. At some point, Ilusion realized that things could never go back to the way they were. The man she had married was no longer the same person, and the emotional connection they once shared was now a distant memory. The love they had for each other had faded, replaced by frustration, loneliness, and emotional exhaustion. Eventually, the inevitable happened. Their marriage fell apart, and Ilusion made the painful decision to leave. But despite the end of their relationship, the story wasn't over. For years after their divorce, the public continued to speculate about the reasons behind their split. Some said it was the pressure of fame. Others believed it was simply a case of two people growing apart. But no one truly knew what had gone on behind closed doors. For Ilusion, the silence was the hardest part. She had been through the pain of the divorce, but speaking about it seemed almost impossible. She didn't want to add fuel to the fire of speculation, and she didn't want to hurt her children by making their personal lives public. So, she stayed silent. She allowed the rumors to swirl, the questions to linger, and the world to continue to speculate about what went wrong. But after years of silence, Ilusion finally made the decision to speak out. She had carried the weight of her story for far too long, and it was time for her voice to be heard. The truth was not just about their marriage, but about the emotional toll of being in the public eye, of living in the shadow of a celebrity, and of the hidden struggles that many people face behind closed doors. Ilusion's story was one of love loss, and the realization that sometimes, even the strongest relationships can break under the weight of fame and expectation. It was time for the world to understand what had really happened in her marriage to Cesar Millan, and to hear the truth from the woman who had been there from the beginning. The world was about to learn that even the most admired couples are not immune to the pressures of fame and the complexities of a relationship that the public can never truly understand. Ilusion Millan's truth would finally be revealed, and with it, the answer to a mystery that had lingered for far too long. For years, the world had only seen the polished, confident exterior of Cesar Millan. He was the man who could calm the most difficult dogs, the trainer with the magic touch, adored by millions. His show, The Dog Whisperer, was a massive success, turning him into a household name, admired not just for his skill with animals, but for his calm demeanor and almost mystical understanding of dog behavior. Fans saw him as a genius in his field, and his life appeared perfect: a beautiful wife, 2 sons, and a thriving career. But the reality of his personal life, hidden behind the fame, was something far less glamorous. Despite all the attention and accolades, Cesar's marriage to Ilusion was crumbling under the weight of the pressures of fame. What the world didn't see, what no one had been privy to, was the slow, painful unraveling of their relationship. In the early years, they were a power couple, building a life together, working as a team. But as Cesar's career took off, the balance in their relationship shifted. Ilusion was left to play the supporting role, silently bearing the emotional cost of her husband's success. She had always stood by him, supporting his dreams, but over time, she started to feel like she was no longer a priority. Cesar, constantly in the spotlight, was becoming more and more distant. The fame, the endless demands from his career, the pressure to maintain a public image, all of it took a toll. Ilusion tried to hold things together, but the emotional strain was beginning to break her. She longed for her husband to see her, to be the partner she once knew, but instead he became increasingly absorbed in his work and the adoration of the public. As the years went on, the connection between them weakened. Despite everything that was happening in their private lives, Cesar maintained his image as a calm, collected professional, handling troubled dogs with ease, while his personal life became a storm. He was celebrated for his ability to remain composed and focused, but behind closed doors, the same qualities seemed to be absent when it came to his marriage. Ilusion had become a shadow in her own life. She had watched as her husband's fame grew, yet she felt invisible. She was the one who had helped him build his career, yet now, it seemed as if she was being left behind in the dust of his success. The emotional neglect, the sense of being forgotten, started to take a toll on her. What was once a loving, equal partnership now felt like a one-sided relationship. The pain was not just in the growing distance between them, but in the feeling of being unseen, unheard, and unimportant. The public had no idea what was going on behind the scenes. They saw the smiling couple at public events, the perfect family image that was always presented to the world, but the truth was much darker. The cracks in their marriage had been there for a while, but no one outside their home knew. Ilusion kept her silence, choosing to protect her family's privacy, even as the marriage continued to deteriorate. But as the years passed, the silence became harder to maintain. The emotional toll of being in the background, watching her husband thrive while she withered away in silence, was becoming too much to bear. Ilusion had always been strong, always the supportive partner, but she couldn't keep pretending everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. Finally, after much soul-searching and years of pain, she made the decision to end her marriage. It wasn't a decision made lightly, and it wasn't something she wanted to do, but it was the only choice left for her. She could no longer live in the shadows of Cesar's success. She had given so much of herself to their marriage, but in return, she had received only emotional neglect. The relationship had become an unhealthy dynamic, and despite the love they once shared, it could no longer be saved. When they announced their divorce, the public was shocked. They were the picture of the perfect couple, successful, admired, and adored by fans. No one could understand why they had broken up. The rumors immediately began to swirl, each one more outrageous than the last. Some said it was infidelity, others speculated that it was due to Cesar's demanding career, while some thought it was simply a case of two people growing apart. But the truth, as it often is, was more complex. The pain of the divorce was not just the end of a marriage, but the loss of a relationship that had once meant everything. Ilusion had been with Cesar through it all, through the rise to fame, the building of their family, and the challenges of being in the public eye. But at the end of the day, she was left with nothing but emotional scars. For years, Ilusion stayed silent about the reasons behind the divorce, allowing the rumors to swirl, the gossip to spread. She didn't want to add fuel to the fire, didn't want to expose the hurt she had been carrying for so long. She watched from the sidelines as Cesar continued to live his life, his career still thriving, while she dealt with the fallout of their broken marriage. She had kept her pain hidden for so long, but the silence was suffocating. Ilusion finally realized that she needed to speak out, not just for herself, but for all the people who had wondered what really happened behind the scenes. She owed it to herself to share her truth, to let the world understand that the story was not as simple as the tabloids had made it out to be. The truth was more complex, and the reality of their marriage was far from the picture-perfect image that had been portrayed. Ilusion's silence had been a heavy burden to carry, but now, the time had come to speak up. She wanted the world to understand the emotional toll that living in the public eye had taken on her, and how the pressures of fame had affected her marriage, in ways no one could have ever imagined. The decision to end her marriage was not made out of spite or anger, but out of necessity. It was a painful choice, but one that was ultimately the right one for her. Now that she was ready to share her side of the story, the world would finally get a glimpse into the real reasons behind the divorce, and the emotional journey that led to it. The truth would be a revelation, one that would shock those who thought they knew everything about the Millan family. The full story, one that had been kept hidden for so long, was about to be told. The world was finally going to hear Ilusion's truth. After years of keeping quiet about their personal struggles, the truth behind the divorce of Cesar Millan and his wife Ilusion was finally coming to light. It was a story no one had expected, especially from the outside looking in. From the moment they first appeared together, Cesar and Ilusion had been the picture-perfect couple. The world watched as Cesar built his career as the dog whisperer, with millions of fans, and Ilusion stood by his side through it all. Their family appeared strong and united, with their 2 children growing up in the spotlight. But beneath the fame, the glittering exterior, and the perfect facade, things were slowly beginning to fall apart. As Cesar's career took off, he found himself consumed with the demands of his job. Long hours on set, constant traveling, and the overwhelming pressure to maintain his public image took their toll. Ilusion, who had always been supportive of her husband, began to feel as though she was being left behind. Despite standing by him through thick and thin, she found herself becoming more isolated in their marriage. The emotional disconnect between them started slowly but grew over time. Cesar, who had once been her rock, became less and less available. His focus shifted almost entirely to his career and the world of dog training, leaving Ilusion feeling neglected and lonely. She was no longer the center of his world, and the loneliness she felt in her marriage was becoming unbearable. For years she silently endured, trying to convince herself that things would improve, but deep down she knew that their connection was fading. The love they once shared was no longer present, replaced by frustration and sadness. Their marriage became more of a routine, a partnership that functioned but lacked the warmth and closeness they had once shared. Ilusion kept hoping things would turn around, but the emotional distance only grew wider. At times she felt like she was living in a marriage without the true partnership that she had once believed in. No matter how hard she tried to hold on to the relationship, it was clear that the spark that had brought them together had dimmed. The strain on their marriage was not just about long hours or time spent apart, it was a deeper issue. As the years went by, Ilusion began to realize that her emotional needs were no longer being met. She had supported Cesar's dreams, helped him build his career, and sacrificed so much of her own personal life. But in doing so, she had neglected herself, and the emotional toll was starting to show. She had become a shadow in her own marriage, fading into the background of Cesar's busy life. The more she tried to make things work, the more she realized that Cesar's emotional availability had decreased. Despite their efforts to keep their personal lives private, the cracks in their marriage began to show, especially to those closest to them. They continued to put on a united front for the public, attending events together and maintaining the image of the perfect family. But those who knew them best could see that the spark had gone, and the emotional strain was beginning to take its toll. Ilusion was no longer content with pretending everything was fine. The strain of living a life that wasn't truly her own had become too much to bear. she realized that the relationship had reached a breaking point, and it was time to confront the truth. Her voice had been silenced for so long, and she was finally ready to speak out. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. For years she had tried to protect her family's privacy, not wanting to air their dirty laundry to the public. But the emotional burden of keeping silent had grown heavy, and she knew it was time for her to speak her truth. In her heart she knew that her story was important, not just for her own healing, but for others who had been in similar situations. She was ready to reveal the truth about their marriage, about the struggles they faced, and about the emotional neglect she had endured for years. The truth was far more complicated than anyone outside of their marriage could have imagined. Ilusion's decision to finally speak out was a monumental one. She had spent years holding on to the pain, the unanswered questions, and the emotional exhaustion, but the time had come for her to reclaim her voice and tell the world what had really happened behind closed doors. This wasn't about revenge or airing their personal struggles for the sake of drama. It was about honesty, healing, and finally putting her feelings into words. It was about telling the world that she had been more than just Cesar Millan's wife. She had been a woman who had sacrificed her own well-being for the sake of a marriage that had ultimately failed. The truth about their divorce was not about blame, it was about understanding the complexities of a relationship that had once seemed perfect, but was ultimately strained by years of emotional neglect. Ilusion had spent so much time supporting Cesar's career, but somewhere along the way she had lost herself. In telling her side of the story, she wasn't trying to tear down her ex-husband. Instead, she was speaking out to help others understand that even the most admired couples can go through difficult times. Their marriage was built on love, but it was also weighed down by the pressures of fame, the demands of work, and the emotional toll that came with it. The truth was painful, but it was necessary for her healing, and for the closure that she desperately needed. The world had seen Cesar Millan as the calm, confident dog trainer, who could handle any situation, but the truth was, he was also a man who had been struggling with his own personal issues. Their marriage had been a complicated journey, and for Ilusion, it was finally time to let go and face the reality of their relationship. The emotional weight of keeping up appearances had become too much for her to handle. She was ready to share the truth, not for anyone else, but for herself. It was time to let go of the past and move forward with her life, knowing that she had done everything she could to make their marriage work. It was an incredibly difficult decision, but one that ultimately allowed her to take back control of her life and move toward a healthier, happier future. As Cesar Millan's personal life began to unravel publicly, the world watched in awe and disbelief. For years, the famous dog trainer had been seen as a symbol of calmness, control, and emotional stability, not only with dogs, but also in his personal life. His marriage to Ilusion, which had once appeared as strong and steady as his professional demeanor, had taken a dramatic and unexpected turn. What people didn't know was that behind the scenes, the cracks were growing wider, hidden beneath the surface of Cesar's well-curated image. Ilusion had been quiet for so long, maintaining the balance, keeping their personal life hidden from the public eye. The pressures of being married to a celebrity, coupled with the demands of managing a family, had taken their toll. It wasn't the fame or the attention that was breaking her, it was the loneliness, the quiet struggles that no one could see. As the years went by, she became increasingly isolated, disconnected from the very person she had built her life with. But no one outside of their circle knew what was happening. Ilusion had kept up the appearance of the perfect wife, the supportive partner, all while silently dealing with the emotional neglect she was facing. The emotional pain she felt was impossible to ignore any longer. When she finally found the courage to speak up, the revelations shook the public. The woman who had supported Cesar's rise to fame, stood by him as he became a household name, was now opening up about her side of the story. She had been silenced for so long, but now, at last, she was telling the truth, and it was more devastating than anyone could have imagined. Behind the smiles, the appearances, and the world of media that had seen them as an unbreakable couple, there was a woman who had been abandoned emotionally, trapped in a relationship that was no longer fulfilling. Her story was a reminder that even the most seemingly perfect couples could be hiding intense personal struggles. Ilusion's decision to speak out wasn't just about revealing the personal pain she had endured, it was about reclaiming her voice. It was about no longer letting her story be a footnote to Cesar's narrative. For years, she had been living in the shadow of his fame, sacrificing her own needs and desires to support his career. But the emotional cost was too great, and it was clear that something had to give. As the layers of their marriage were peeled back, it became evident that what appeared to be a picture-perfect union was in fact a partnership filled with hidden sorrow. Cesar, who had always been in control with his dogs, had lost control of his own life. The more people learned about the truth of their relationship, the more questions arose. What had really happened behind closed doors? How had a couple who seemed so in sync drifted apart so completely? How could the same man who had helped so many dogs connect emotionally with their owners, failed to do so in his own home? The deeper one delved into the situation, the more intriguing it became. Ilusion's silence had been broken, and the public was left with the aftermath of a life once lived in the shadows. Her decision to speak out was nothing short of empowering. Her willingness to share her story was a powerful reminder that even those who are married to celebrities are human, and even they can experience pain, neglect, and personal struggles. As people continued to digest what she had revealed, they began to wonder how it would impact Cesar Millan's career. Would his fans still look up to him in the same way now that they knew about the issues in his marriage? Would his professional success suffer, or would people continue to see him as the calm, confident dog whisperer who could solve anyone's problems? What had truly gone wrong behind the scenes, and what could have been done to fix it? This was more than just a marriage falling apart, it was a look into the deeper struggles of fame, relationships, and the emotional toll of living a life in the public eye. As Ilusion finally spoke her truth, she revealed not only her pain, but also the weight of living under the constant gaze of the public eye. The pressure, the expectations, and the sacrifices had all taken their toll. Her silence was broken, and now, people were left to wonder what happens next. Could this revelation lead to healing, or was it just the beginning of more challenges ahead for both Ilusion and Cesar? The curiosity surrounding their personal lives had reached a boiling point, and what had been kept private for so long was now the center of public attention. The emotional toll of fame, the cracks in their relationship, and the sacrifices made for the sake of their family, all collided in one explosive moment of truth. The world had been watching, and now, with the veil lifted, everyone was eager to know what would come next. Would Cesar rise above the scrutiny, or would the unraveling of his personal life impact his professional future in ways no one could predict? Now that the truth about Ilusion and Cesar Millan's relationship was out in the open, the next question on everyone's mind was what would happen to them going forward. For years, people had admired them as a couple who seemed unshakable, a pair that had it all: love, success, and a shared passion for animals. But now that the reality of their broken marriage was exposed, it was clear that the image of perfection they once projected was only a facade. Ilusion, who had been silent for so long, finally found her voice. The truth she revealed about her pain, her sacrifices, and her emotional struggles resonated with many who had never known the full story. Her silence had been broken, and with it came both a sense of relief and uncertainty. For years, she had stood in the shadow of her husband's fame, and now she was stepping into the light, reclaiming her narrative, and defining herself as more than just Cesar Millan's wife. The public response to her revelations was mixed, as is often the case with any high-profile breakup. Some people sympathized with her and applauded her courage, while others questioned the timing of her words, or felt that airing such personal details was unnecessary. Despite the mixed reactions, one thing was undeniable: Ilusion's voice had been heard. She was no longer the silent partner. She was now a woman standing tall and owning her story. The change in her was palpable. No longer did she live in the shadow of a man who was constantly in the public eye. She was taking control of her own narrative, facing the world on her terms, and taking the first steps toward healing. Meanwhile, Cesar was facing a very different set of challenges. He had built a reputation as a calm, authoritative figure, not only in the world of dog training, but also in personal relationships. As someone who had long been seen as a trusted figure in managing relationships, be they between dogs and owners or people, his personal life had now come under scrutiny. The world had always looked up to him as someone who had the answers, someone who could provide guidance and wisdom. But now, with the knowledge of his failed marriage out in the open, his credibility was being questioned by many. How could someone who had struggled so deeply in his own relationship continue to offer advice on others' lives? How could he, the man who helped thousands of people with their dogs, not have been able to apply that same wisdom to his own marriage? These questions lingered in the air, creating an aura of doubt around his professional expertise. People wondered if his ability to communicate with animals translated to his ability to communicate with people. Was he the same man they had come to admire, or was there something more complicated beneath the surface? While some continued to defend him, pointing out that no one is perfect, and that everyone faces personal struggles, others were less forgiving. In many ways, the truth about Cesar was more complicated than the public could have anticipated. It wasn't just a matter of a failed marriage, it was about the vulnerability of a man who had built an empire on the image of unwavering strength and control. What made the situation even more complex was the fact that despite the fallout from the divorce, both Ilusion and Cesar were still, in some ways, linked by their shared past. Their lives had been intertwined for so long that it wasn't easy for either of them to move on entirely. Though their marriage had ended, the emotional scars remained, and both were navigating the challenge of moving forward, while still carrying the weight of their history together. It wasn't about erasing the past, it was about learning from it and figuring out how to heal. For Ilusion, this meant reclaiming her personal identity and finding her own sense of peace, free from the pressure of being defined by her relationship with Cesar. For Cesar, it was about dealing with the public perception of his failure and how to rebuild trust, not just in his personal life, but in his professional reputation as well. The road ahead for both of them was unclear. The world had watched as their relationship unfolded in the public eye, and now they had to figure out how to navigate their separate lives, while still being connected to the past. Healing, in this case, was not a linear process, it was a winding journey filled with emotional ups and downs. The uncertainty of their futures created a sense of suspense, with people eagerly awaiting to see what would come next. Would Cesar be able to reclaim his position as a trusted figure in the public's eye, or would his personal struggles overshadow his professional achievements? Could Ilusion truly find peace and happiness after so many years of sacrifice and emotional turmoil? Would their individual paths to healing lead to separate yet peaceful futures, or would they continue to be linked in the public consciousness, forever intertwined by their shared history? The silence that had hung over them for so long had finally been shattered, but it was clear that the road to recovery was going to take time. Both Ilusion and Cesar had a long way to go before they could fully heal and move forward, but the one thing that was certain was that they had taken the first step. The truth had been revealed, and now they could begin the process of healing, growth, and figuring out what their new lives would look like. For now, the world could only watch and wait as they navigated their separate paths, wondering what would happen next.